I still remember the first day I met Emily. I was 7, sitting on the front steps of my house with scraped knees after falling off my bike, tears streaking down my dusty cheeks. She came running from across the street, clutching a small box of Band-Aids in her hand, her blonde hair flying everywhere, and without hesitation she sat down beside me and said, "Don't cry, I've got the good ones with dinosaurs on them." That was Emily in my memory, fearless, direct, like she already knew the world belonged to her and she would just pull me along for the ride. We became inseparable from that moment, the kind of friends who spent endless afternoons drawing chalk cities on the sidewalk or whispering secrets under a blanket fort, convinced that no one else could understand us. My mum used to call us twins by choice, not blood. As kids we even shared clothes, notebooks, silly made-up songs, everything. When middle school came, we sat together in every class we could, scribbling notes back and forth, laughing until teachers gave us looks. I thought Emily would always be the one person who had my back no matter what. She was bold, popular, the kind of girl everyone wanted to be near, and I felt lucky that she chose me. She would say things like, "You're the only real one, don't ever forget it." And I believed her. But even then, small cracks showed that I didn't want to see. Like the way she'd get mad if I played with other girls at recess, or the times she'd whisper about people behind their backs and then smile sweetly to their faces. I brushed it off as normal middle school drama. I told myself, she's just protective, she cares about me. Looking back, I realized those were the first shadows of something darker. High school came and everything shifted. Emily bloomed like she had been waiting for the stage lights. She was beautiful in a way that made heads turn, with that effortless confidence that drew people in. I was quieter, more into books and drawing, and I was fine being in her orbit. At least, at first. We'd still have sleepovers, painting our nails and talking about boys, but there were new edges to her laughter, sharper comments she'd toss at me when no one else could hear. She started making jokes about how plain I was, how I'd probably be invisible without her. And when I protested, she'd grin and say, "Relax, it's just a joke, you're too sensitive." I didn't tell anyone, not even my mum. I kept trying to hold on to that little girl with the dinosaur Band-Aids, the one who made me feel safe and chosen. But the more I tried, the more she slipped away. By junior year, Emily had a circle of friends who adored her, who copied the way she dressed and laughed too loud at her stories. I was still invited, but more and more it felt like I was just a prop in her show. If I spoke up, she'd cut me off. If I wore something nice, she'd roll her eyes and say I was trying too hard. And then she'd drape her arm over my shoulder in front of others, calling me her best friend, making it impossible for me to admit how lonely I actually felt. One memory sticks sharper than the rest. It was at a party, the first real high school party I'd ever gone to. Emily had convinced me to wear a dress that was a little tighter than I was comfortable with. She promised, "Trust me, you'll look amazing, people will finally notice you." I wanted so badly to believe her. But when we got there, I realized what she had done. She spent the whole night making little comments to people about how awkward I looked, how I couldn't walk straight in heels, how I was trying out for prom queen early. People laughed. I laughed too, pretending it didn't sting, but inside I wanted to crawl out of my own skin. Later that night, while everyone was distracted, I locked myself in the bathroom and cried quietly, staring at my reflection and wondering if maybe she was right, maybe I was nothing without her. That was the first time I admitted to myself that my best friend was starting to feel like my worst enemy. The weeks after that party felt like living under a spotlight I never asked for, because Emily made sure everyone remembered how I couldn't handle a little fun, and whenever someone teased me she would smirk and say, "Lighten up, she knows I love her." But the words started to feel like chains around my chest, pulling tighter every time I tried to breathe. And yet I still followed her around because I didn't know who I was. Without her, I thought being her sidekick was better than being alone. My mom noticed me getting quieter, spending more time locked in my room sketching in notebooks, drawing faces of girls who looked stronger than me, girls who didn't flinch when someone mocked them. And once she asked me if Emily was treating me right, but I laughed it off, because how could I explain that the girl who once patched my knee now cut into me with her words sharper than any blade? In senior year, the tension grew heavier, like a storm cloud that refused to move. And one day it broke during lunch in the cafeteria when Emily suddenly announced loudly in front of our table that I had a crush on a boy who barely even knew my name. She made it sound like a confession I had spilled to her in confidence, which I hadn't, and the whole table laughed as my face burned hot, and I wanted to disappear into the floor, but she looked at me with those gleaming eyes that said she enjoyed every second of it. That afternoon I walked home alone for the first time in years, the air cold and sharp in my lungs, and I remember gripping my backpack straps so hard my knuckles turned white, telling myself I didn't need her anymore, but then hating myself, because I knew I'd still pick up the phone if she called. And of course she did call later, giggling like nothing had happened, asking if I wanted to come over, and I said yes, because some twisted part of me thought if I stayed close, maybe she wouldn't hurt me as much, maybe I could win back the girl with the dinosaur band-aids. But things only escalated when college decisions came, because I got into a school she desperately wanted, the one she had been dreaming of for years, and instead of congratulating me, she stared at me with a frozen smile and whispered, "You don't even belong there, you only got lucky." And for the first time I felt her envy burn through, more dangerous than all the mocking jokes, because it showed me she didn't just want to put me down, she wanted to crush me completely. When fall came and I packed for college, I thought maybe distance would finally free me, but Emily wasn't done with me because she made sure her voice followed me through texts and calls that alternated between sweetness and venom. One moment saying she missed me and the next reminding me that I'd never survive without her. And at first I clung to those messages like lifelines. Because I was terrified of starting fresh, I had always hidden behind her shadow, and without it I felt exposed, like everyone could see how unsure I was. On campus I tried to reinvent myself, joining a small art club, sitting with people I didn't know in the cafeteria, but every time I laughed too loudly or shared a piece of my sketchbook I'd get a buzzing on my phone, Emily's words cutting in, asking who I thought I was, mocking the pictures I posted online, pointing out flaws only she would know, and I'd crumble inside even if I smiled in front of others. One night she showed up unannounced at my dorm, having driven hours just to check on me, but really she wanted to remind me she still had control, barging into my space, flipping through my things, commenting on my clothes, telling my roommate embarrassing stories from high school, and I stood there frozen, humiliated but unable to tell her to leave. After she left, my roommate asked me quietly if Emily was always like that, and I shrugged because, how could I explain years of history tangled in loyalty and fear? Weeks later during finals I received a message from an unknown number with screenshots of private journal pages I had written online under a pseudonym, raw confessions about loneliness and self-doubt, and I knew instantly it was Emily, because she was the only one who could piece together it was me. She had hacked her way into my most vulnerable place, and I sat on the dorm floor shaking as the realization sank in that she wasn't just toxic, she was dangerous. After that night with the screenshots I couldn't sleep because every time I closed my eyes I pictured Emily's grin. The same grin she had as a child when we shared secrets, only now twisted into something cruel. And I kept wondering how she had gotten into my account. Did she guess my passwords? Did she stalk every detail I ever told her? And the truth was yes, she knew me better than anyone and she weaponized that knowledge like a knife. I started avoiding social media, deleting old posts, changing passwords, but it was like trying to clean water with my bare hands, useless, because she always seemed one step ahead. My grades started slipping because instead of studying, I'd sit at my desk replaying every memory of her, trying to trace where everything had gone wrong, and sometimes I hated myself for missing her laugh, for missing the girl who once braided my hair at sleepovers. Because how could I long for someone who turned me inside out with humiliation? One evening I walked into the dining hall and saw my journal entries printed out on sheets of paper taped to the wall, with red marker circling my sentences. And students were giggling, pointing, whispering, and I felt the room tilt around me, my ears buzzing. And I knew it was her handiwork because who else would go that far? I grabbed the papers with trembling hands, stuffed them into my bag and bolted back to my dorm where I sobbed into my pillow, my roommate trying to console me, but all I could say was, "It's her, it's always her." That night I wrote Emily a long message telling her to stop, begging her, saying she was killing me inside, but she replied with a single line, "Don't act like a victim, you owe me everything." It was in that moment that I realized she didn't just want to hurt me, she wanted me to believe I deserved it. And that realization chilled me deeper than any humiliation, because it meant my childhood friend had indeed become my worst nightmare, and I was trapped between loving who she had been and fearing who she had become. I tried to keep moving forward because college was supposed to be my fresh start. But Emily's shadow followed me into every corner of my life, and I felt like I was walking with chains tied to my ankles, dragging her weight everywhere I went, and no matter how many times I told myself I was done, I kept answering her calls, kept opening her messages, because there was still a part of me that believed maybe if I stayed close, she wouldn't destroy me completely. She began spreading rumors among mutual friends back home that I had stolen her acceptance letter, that I only got into college by copying her application, and soon people I grew up with started sending me texts, asking if it was true, and each one cut like glass because I had worked so hard for that spot. My art professor noticed my silence in class, the way I kept my head down, and one day she asked me to stay after, gently pointing out that my sketches were full of broken faces and trapped bodies, and she asked if I was okay, but I just smiled and lied, because how could I explain that the person destroying me was the same person who once saved me from loneliness? The breaking point came during winter break when I went home and decided to meet Emily for coffee, thinking maybe face to face we could untangle this mess. But the moment I saw her walk in with that perfect hair and her confident smirk, I knew I had made a mistake. She hugged me too tightly, whispering in my ear that she missed me, but then sat down and began criticizing everything about my life, from my clothes to my friends to the way I spoke, and she laughed so loudly that people turned to stare, making me feel like a spectacle. I held it in until I got home, then collapsed on my bed and cried until I couldn't breathe, realizing that she would never let me be free unless I found the strength to cut her out completely. Yet the thought of severing ties felt like tearing out a piece of my own history, because Emily wasn't just a friend, she was woven into my entire identity, and losing her felt like losing part of myself even if that part was killing me slowly. Spring semester started and I promised myself things would change, that I would finally build a life without Emily. But the moment classes began I noticed anonymous notes slipped under my dorm door. Little scraps of paper with phrases like, "You don't belong here," or, "Everyone is laughing at you." And though no name was signed, I knew her handwriting. The sharp curves of her letters burned into my memory from years of passing notes in class. And it made my stomach twist because she wasn't even on campus yet. She had found a way to haunt me. I tried ignoring them, tearing them up, but at night I would hear footsteps in the hall and convince myself she was just outside waiting. And I would lie awake gripping my blanket, heart racing, until the sun finally came up. My roommate suggested going to campus security, but I shook my head because how could I prove it? How could I explain the depth of her obsession without sounding paranoid? The worst part was that sometimes I still missed her, still caught myself reaching for my phone to tell her something funny, or to share a drawing, before remembering that she would twist it, mock it, maybe even use it to hurt me. One weekend I went to visit my parents and found Emily sitting in our living room, sipping tea with my mum like she still belonged in my world, and my mum's face lit up with relief as if nothing had changed, saying how glad she was that we were still close, and I stood there frozen, rage boiling inside me because Emily had infiltrated my safe place, convincing my own family that she was the perfect friend. Later, when we were alone in the kitchen, she leaned close and whispered, "You'll never get rid of me, you're nothing without me." And the way she said it so calmly made my skin crawl like icy water pouring down my back. That night, I lay awake in my childhood bed staring at the ceiling, realizing I had reached a crossroads. Either I let her keep consuming me piece by piece until nothing was left, or I finally fought back, even if it meant burning the last bridge that tied us together, and stepping into a terrifying kind of freedom I had never known before. After that weekend at home, something inside me snapped, because I could no longer pretend that Emily was just a difficult friend. She was an intruder in my life, a poison that seeped into every corner. And I realized if I didn't act soon, she would erase the person I was trying so desperately to become. I returned to campus with a plan, shaky but necessary, and the first step was cutting all direct contact. I blocked her number, unfollowed her on every platform, and told my parents gently but firmly that I needed space from her, though my mum looked confused and hurt, asking what had happened between us, and I simply said, "She isn't the person you think she is," which was the closest I could get to the truth without unraveling completely. At first the silence felt like freedom, like I could finally breathe without her voice echoing in my head, but soon the retaliation began. Anonymous accounts started messaging me online, cruel comments appeared under my posts, and even though there was no proof, I knew it was Emily, because the insults carried details no stranger could possibly know. Things about my past, my fears, my drawings, and I felt my chest tighten each time I read them. One night after an art club meeting, I found my sketchbook missing from my bag, and the next morning pieces of my own drawings were scattered on the floor outside my dorm door, ripped and defaced with scribbled words like fraud and loser, and I sank to my knees picking them up with shaking hands, feeling like I had been stripped bare in front of the world. My roommate urged me again to go to security, and this time I agreed, my voice trembling as I explained. And though they listened and promised to monitor things, a part of me knew Emily was too clever to get caught easily. But something shifted when I spoke up, like I had taken back a sliver of power by no longer keeping her cruelty a secret. And for the first time in years, I wondered if maybe I could survive this storm and walk out stronger, though the fear still clung to me like a second skin. That night I looked at my reflection in the dorm mirror and whispered to myself, "She doesn't own me anymore." And even if I didn't fully believe it yet, saying the words out loud felt like planting a seed of defiance that Emily could never fully destroy. The days that followed were heavy with tension, because every step I took on campus felt like walking on thin ice, certain that at any moment Emily would find another way to remind me she was still out there. And though I had blocked her everywhere, I still felt her eyes on me, an invisible weight pressing down on my shoulders. For a short while I tried drowning myself in routines, going to class, joining study groups, sketching late at night in the art room where the silence was thick but comforting. And I began to feel flickers of peace, fragile yet real, like maybe I could exist without her shadow. But then one evening I walked into the student center and saw a flyer pinned to the bulletin board. It was my face crudely photoshopped with mocking words written across it, things that only Emily could have made up, things I had once shared with her in whispered secrets during childhood. And the humiliation crashed over me in waves so strong I nearly collapsed. People stared as I ripped the flyer down, my hands trembling, and I could hear laughter in the distance, though I couldn't tell if it was real or just my paranoia twisting the air around me. That night I sat on my bed staring at the shredded flyer in my lap, rage and fear battling inside me, and I realized I was done being silent, done letting her dictate whether I could smile or breathe. I began documenting everything, taking photos, saving messages, keeping a journal of each incident, because I understood now this wasn't just cruelty, it was obsession, and if I ever wanted to break free I would need proof. At the same time I started talking to a counselor on campus, my voice shaking during the first session, as I admitted how long this had been going on, how I felt both tethered to Emily and terrified of her. The counselor listened without judgment, and for the first time I felt like someone believed me, like I wasn't just being dramatic or weak. Leaving that office I felt lighter, as if a door had cracked open toward a life where Emily wasn't the center of everything. And though I knew she would not stop easily, I also knew that maybe, just maybe, I was no longer as powerless as she wanted me to believe. With every session at the counselor's office I felt pieces of myself returning, pieces I thought Emily had stolen forever. And I began to notice small shifts in how I carried myself. Shoulders less hunched, voice a little steadier, even daring to laugh without immediately worrying what she would say if she heard me. Yet Emily's presence still bled into my life like ink on paper, because one afternoon my professor pulled me aside and asked if I was okay after receiving an email filled with accusations about me plagiarizing artwork. And though the professor said she didn't believe it, I knew instantly who had sent it, because only Emily would know which projects to target. Only she would take the time to dig through my life just to poison it drop by drop. That night I paced my dorm room for hours, fists clenched, because I realized the truth I had avoided for years. Emily didn't just want to hurt me. She wanted to erase me, to make sure the world saw me as worthless so she could feel powerful. I decided then I would not only keep records but confront her, and though my hands shook at the thought, I knew running away had only given her more room to grow. The chance came unexpectedly when I visited home again for my dad's birthday, and Emily showed up uninvited, sliding into our kitchen with that radiant smile that fooled everyone except me. She hugged my mum, handed my dad a gift and acted like she belonged, but when our eyes met across the table, I saw the fire of challenge there, daring me to speak up. After dinner I cornered her in the backyard, the cold air biting at my skin, and I told her to stop, my voice louder than I expected, shaking but firm. She laughed, tilting her head like I was a child throwing a tantrum, and whispered, "You'll never be rid of me, you're too weak," then walked away like she had already won. I stood there trembling, but something inside me sparked alive. Because for the first time I had said the words out loud, I had faced her, and even if she didn't take me seriously, I did, and that mattered more than her twisted smile. That night, lying in my old bed, I thought about the girl who once patched my knees and realized she was gone forever, replaced by someone who thrived on breaking me, and I knew, if I wanted to survive, I had to become stronger than the version of myself she created. A version that trembled and obeyed. After that confrontation in the backyard, something shifted in me, because even though Emily brushed me off with her mocking laugh, I felt a strange sense of victory just for finally speaking out loud what had been eating at me for years. And that night, I lay awake realizing that fear only had power if I kept it hidden. Back at school I threw myself into my art with a determination that surprised even me. Staying up until sunrise, sketching, painting, and pouring all the years of silence and humiliation into canvases that told stories words could never capture. And for the first time my work began to draw attention in class. Professors praising my raw emotion, classmates asking questions instead of ignoring me. Each compliment felt like a tiny shield forming around me. Proof that maybe I wasn't the invisible failure Emily had tried so hard to make me believe I was. Still, the attacks didn't stop, because one morning I opened my email to find dozens of anonymous messages. Each one crueler than the last, some mocking my art, some twisting childhood memories into weapons. and I could practically hear her voice in every line. Instead of collapsing like before, I saved them all, creating a folder labeled evidence, and as I clicked save after save, I felt something almost empowering. Like I was collecting stones to finally build a wall between me and her. The counselor encouraged me to take it further, to talk to administrators, and though my throat tightened at the idea of making it official, I agreed. And when I sat in that office explaining everything with shaking hands, I saw genuine concern in their eyes, not dismissal, and they promised to investigate. Walking out of that meeting, I felt lighter, though deep down I knew Emily would not give up quietly, because her cruelty was not just spite, it was control, and losing control of me would infuriate her. That night, as I sat in my dorm lit only by the glow of my desk lamp, I realized I was no longer that girl crying in bathrooms or trembling in the hallway. I was someone who had finally begun to fight back. And though I didn't know what the next battle would look like, I promised myself I would no longer let Emily write the story of who I was meant to be, because my voice was stronger than her whispers and I was finally learning how to use it. The weeks after reporting her felt like walking through fog because I never knew what would happen next, if Emily would escalate, or if finally someone would hold her accountable. But even in the uncertainty, I felt a new kind of strength rising inside me. A quiet defiance that surprised me every time I heard my own voice steady instead of trembling. One night after an art showcase where 2 of my paintings were displayed, I overheard students talking about how powerful and haunting my work felt, and for the first time I didn't shrink from the compliment. I let it soak in, reminding myself that these creations came from my own hands, not from her shadow. Still, Emily's grip hadn't loosened because just a few days later a package arrived at my dorm, no return address, and inside was the old stuffed bear I had given her when we were kids, its seams torn, its eyes scribbled out with black marker, and a note that simply read, "Remember who you are without me." Holding it in my hands, I felt a wave of nausea, the cruelty of twisting something so innocent into another weapon. And yet instead of collapsing, I placed it in my evidence box, another piece of proof that her obsession had crossed into something undeniable. My parents called later that week, confused after Emily told them I was making up lies about her, and my mum's voice carried that familiar doubt, asking why I was being so harsh towards someone who had always been like a sister. It hurt more than I wanted to admit, like another betrayal. But I calmly told her there were things she didn't know, things I couldn't explain fully yet, and that I needed her to trust me. Hanging up, I realized how deep Emily's manipulation ran, how far she was willing to go to paint herself as the victim, but instead of despair, I felt determination harden inside me, because I was tired of being cornered by her lies. That weekend I returned to the counselor and asked for legal advice. Shaking but resolute, and she connected me with someone who explained the steps to file a harassment claim. The thought terrified me because it meant drawing a permanent line, but as I walked back across campus the air felt different, almost lighter, and I realized maybe the end of this nightmare wasn't about erasing Emily from my history but about reclaiming my voice so fully that nothing she did could silence it again. And for the first time in years I allowed myself to imagine a future where her name no longer had power over me. Filing the harassment claim was one of the hardest decisions I had ever made, because it felt like taking a knife to the roots of my own past, cutting away the little girl who once sat on the steps with scraped knees and found comfort in dinosaur band-aids. But I knew if I didn't do it, Emily would keep bleeding into every corner of my life until there was nothing left of me. The process was long and exhausting, meetings with administrators, emails back and forth, the constant fear that maybe no one would take me seriously. But slowly, a case began to form, and for the first time I felt like I wasn't screaming into the void. My professors supported me, my roommate gave statements, even a few students who had witnessed the flyers and cruel pranks stepped forward, and piece by piece the web she had woven began to unravel. When Emily was finally called in by the university, I wasn't in the room, but I imagined her sitting there with that same smirk, trying to charm her way out of consequences, yet this time her words weren't enough, because there was evidence, there were voices besides mine, and she couldn't twist the truth to fit her story anymore. She was barred from contacting me, from stepping onto my campus, and though I knew she could still lash out in other ways, the weight pressing on my chest lifted in a way I hadn't felt in years. That night I walked across campus under the streetlights, the air sharp and cool, and I let myself cry, not from fear this time, but from relief, from finally standing on the other side of something that had nearly broken me. I thought about all the years I wasted believing I needed her, believing I was nothing without her, and I realized how wrong I had been, because in surviving her I had discovered parts of myself I never would have found otherwise. Resilience, courage, a voice that refused to stay quiet. And though a piece of me still mourned the friend I once loved, I understood now that she was gone long before I let her go, replaced by someone who thrived on cruelty. My revenge wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quieter, more lasting, because it lived in every choice I made to keep going, to keep creating, to keep living without her shadow. And as I looked up at the night sky, stars flickering faintly above, I whispered to myself that I was free, that I was finally writing a story where Emily no longer had a role, and the silence that followed wasn't empty, it was beautiful, like the first breath after being held underwater for far too long.